이제 전부도던 힘이 저 오늘 모놈 전부가 된다. 그러다 감산도 실만도 돈바들지 잘라 기정자로 이제는 저는 이정금서 저 뜻이신로 연락. 이제 맨판조 잘라고 안데 공기 도반포로 신기로
The answer past profound and wonderful Dharma is difficult to encounter in billions of aeons. I now see it here, receive and uphold it, vow to fathom the Tathagata's true meaning, to liberate all beings. Let's generate the supreme bodhicitta. Now let us continue with our class. Our class on the Shrangama Sutra. Before the actual class, I have a few things to address. The first thing is something that I've been talking about quite often lately. I'm risking that you won't take my words very seriously. But I have to readdress this again because recently I've noticed many of you are gathered in groups a lot, going to have meals together or gathered together. So this is not very convenient for all of us because the regulations for Larangar still has not changed. You need to make sure that you follow the rules and the regulations made by the management team. I encourage all of you to try to stay home as much as possible whenever you don't have other things to do on the outside. Sometimes if you need to go to the restaurant or go to the shops, then that's fine. But if you were to visit those places every day, that is not a good sign. I think as a monastic, it is quite crucial for you to stay home and engage in study and contemplation at all times. Our management team or the management team over here would patrol the area every day as usual. That's one of the reasons. And the second reason is that there is an relapse of COVID because of tourists and because of other reasons. As you probably have already heard, in Lhasa, in Ngari, actually, there are currently new cases. Despite that, rarely any cases occurred over that area in the past 2 years. So we need to be vigilant over here. Another thing is that nowadays we have more visitors than the past 2 years. But it's not necessary for you to become a tour guide to take the lay practitioners or the tourists here and there. Some of you are simply doing it out of a good heart, and some of you are probably just doing it out of some hidden agendas. For example, doing others a favor and expecting something in return. Of course, we need to show kindness and help the others out, especially the newcomers or the tourists. But it's not necessarily for you to do that every single day, because this is not your responsibility. You're not here to become a tour guide. Your responsibility is to stay here and study and practice the genuine Dharma. Another thing I would like to address is that after we have an influx of the tourists, it seems that there is an overall price rise in the hotels, restaurants, as well as our clinics, the hotel and the hospitals and clinics.
他们的话呢，就是在客房的那个
especially
这个就光是架一个
Dharmapala, the hostel that we have over here. I recently heard that during the time where we were all practicing the Kashidi mantra, since there are many people and some of the management would overcharge for even adding one bed. The manager said, "Oh no, it was just bad management." But I don't think so. These kinds of unnecessary and unreasonable price rise happens not just here but everywhere else. For example, in Serta County, one bedroom would cost 400 RMB per night, which is overpriced. Which reminded me of Sanya, which is the holy grail of tourism in winter for the Chinese. Because the local hotels and restaurants would raise their pricing unnecessarily and unreasonably, it seems like a ripoff to the tourists, and the tourists vow to never visit that area again. When we look at examples like such, we need to reflect upon our own aspiration of providing those services. We're not here to make profit. Of course, we're not here to. Of course, we cannot run a business by losing money, but our main goal is not to gain profit. It's okay for you to raise a certain amount of money during the traveling seasons, but it has to be reasonable. It has to be made very transparent to everybody. You cannot just manure the numbers by yourself. I've mentioned this before. When it comes to money, when it comes to, for example, renting out the houses or receiving the money and so on and so forth, it's quite crucial for you to make sure that the pricing is fit into the regulations over here. Do not get too greedy by seeing that more tourists are showing up in Arangar. According to Abhidharma, there are various descriptions on greed. I'm sure you've studied that and you're quite aware of the distinctions of greed. So you need to pay attention to your own mind. I notice some of the lamas and jomos over here, or if you were to notice some of the lamas and jomos try to receive favors from the tourists, you can tell me about it. And in terms of all of our organizations or all of our business over here, if the raise of the price is reasonable, that's okay. But if you feel it's not reasonable, let me know as well. Do not make Arangar into some kind of tourist attraction that has the reputation of ripping off the tourists. That is not good, because our purpose is to serve the others. That should be our attitude. Our service to the others is out of our kindness. And then, of course, on top of that, by following this market economy, we can provide a reasonable pricing to the others. Another thing I would like to mention is the exams. Currently, we are entering into this exam month. I notice many of you, I believe a majority of you, are attending those exams. maybe exams on memorizing verses or on presentation or written exams, whatever kind of exams that you're attending, I am quite delighted. Because making this Dharma offering in front of the whole Sangha is quite crucial and it is meritorious. In the past, I tried my best to attend these kinds of Dharma offering events, but this year and recently I got really busy. Today, for example, I went to the west side of the mountain, then went to the mandala structure, and then had lots of meetings, and then went to the library. So I've spent my day, morning and afternoon, on maintaining the smooth running of our infrastructures and of the management. Maybe it's beneficial, maybe it's not. Many of the things that I am doing now, some of you may know it, some of you probably will know it later, or some of you probably would never know it, but it doesn't matter as long as whatever I am doing could provide you a platform for you to wholeheartedly engage in practice and study, then I'm fine with that. And this time during the exam season, I won't be able to attend all of the Dharma offering sessions, so I encourage the Khenpos and Khenmos to take care of the whole procedure of exams. This is a great opportunity to make Dharma offering. Also, since there's a relapse of the pandemic over here, the lay practitioners should not come into the shrine hall. There are reasons for it. Please do not travel around to visit so-and-so Lama and so-and-so Guru. If you really want to listen to the Dharma class, just stay home and listen to the radio. On top of that, you can make circumambulance practice around the mandala structure. It is definitely not necessary for you to be gathered in large groups and in high density with the other people. We're trying to be vigilant here because if you're not, it could create various kinds of problems, and we're trying to avoid those kinds of problems. Otherwise, we may be forced to adapt a new way of resolving those issues. So we're trying to avoid that. Nowadays, lots of Tibetans and Han Chinese are traveling here, but I am not having audience or seeing anyone. On top of that, it seems that lots of Buddhists really enjoy to visit and take tours into the Guru's house. This is very foolish. What is there to see in a house? If you respect a Guru and respect him and see him as a king, why would you, or how would someone who respects the king to visit the king's palace? But the Buddhists nowadays treat the gurus in a very different way. For example, I heard that there were people who went to a certain guru's house and insisted on going inside of the house, but that is not allowed. This is a violation of other privacy. In the West, let it be scholars, teachers, professors, or your own residence. Usually without an invitation, others are not allowed to barge in, to trespass. But it seems that nowadays lots of the Buddhists want to see what the guru's mattress look like, or the cushion looks like, or the meditation seat look like. This is very foolish. The Buddhists should engage in study and contemplation and practice, but looking at the guru's car or where he sat, where he stayed, that is not a sign of a cultured person. It is rather quite superstitious and sometimes bordering insane, because there are people who would cry out loud after seeing the teacher, and the whole activity and the actions doesn't seem very sane, and it's very difficult to adjust to that kind of behavior. Therefore, as Buddhists, we need to learn how to be a normal person first. We need to calm down. I don't want to elaborate too much. Let's get into the actual class. What is that sound? Conch? No, it does sound like the honking of a car. Now let us begin our class on the wish-fulfilling treasury. Yesterday, we have already talked about the 7 great fires, the 1 water and 1 wind. Usually that's what we talk about. Out of the 7 great fires, we already covered a part of it, so let's continue. In the verse over here, it says that fire pervasively burned to the ground of hell, ascending upwards and accelerated by wind. It burns the immeasurable palace of the Brahma heavens, which caused great terror to the Abhashvaras, celestial beings. But the senior celestial beings tells the younger ones that it had happened before. So previously, we've already learned that at the time of the 7 suns appearing in this world, all the vegetations and the oceans, rivers and lakes, and all the forests and groves would be burnt into ashes. And then this fire would reach all the way to the Vajra hell. At the time that all hell realms are burnt away as well, the fire would ascend upwards and accelerated by the wind, which then would permeate over the celestial realm. The immeasurable palace of the Brahmas would be destroyed as well. At that time, all the celestial beings of the Abhashvaras heaven, especially the young ones, would get very scared and terrified at seeing the fire, because they would look at such kind of shade and the light and shadow that's created by this fire. Therefore, these celestial beings in Abhashvara's heaven would keep on thinking about that fire. At the time of the celestial beings looking at such a great fire, the celestial beings would get quite terrified in the Abhashvara's heaven. But the senior celestial beings, the older ones, would console the younger ones, telling them that, oh, don't be frightened, don't be afraid, because this fire had happened before, but it would just reach to the Brahma's heaven. But after it reaches to the Brahma's heaven, it will slowly cease, it will slowly be extinguished, and it will no longer be burnt to our level of the celestial realm, so you don't need to be afraid at all. Since this fire would not burn further to anywhere above the first dhyana heavens. Yesterday, when we talked about the fire, we talked about the fire within and the fire that exists on the outside. It seems that nowadays, the fire within the sentient being's mind stream is burning this fire of aggression.
吃性啊，就是这什么贪性的话，那就是代表这个税。
Greed,
就是还有傲慢的
greed
话，那就是代表就是什么地啊、凤啊，就是也有各种这个
is
界神嘛。
the
所以说
sign of
呢，
greed
就
is
现在这
water,
个世界
and
上就是
arrogance
确实
is
我
ground
们也
and
可以
wind.
看得
There are
出来，就
different
往
ways of
常的话呢，
explaining
很
it,
多
of
人就
course.
是无缘无故地开
Nowadays,
始
people
争吵，
around the
无法
world
平息。
have
然后
lots of
现实生
anger,
活当
lots of
中的话呢，
aggression. We can
不
see
管
that
是
even
出
on the
家人
internet,
在
there are
家人，
lots of
很多人的内心的
arguments
祸
and
呢，就是
conflicts.
就依照
And
这个
within
啊，
our
就是
daily
这个
life,
自己
let
观
it
察的
be
时
the
候也
monastics
就
or
是
lay
也会知
practitioners,
道的，就是那
the
么这其实
fire
是
of
有什么
aggression
样的
also
心态的话
burns
呢，就是外面的
fiercely
世界也是
inside people's
也是
mind.
这样的，就是可能我们看到就
You
是外
should
面就
look
是现在特别
inwardly
火热的
to
话呢，
make the
实际上我们
observation
这
of
个
your own
能以
mindset.
这个众
Also
生的
look
这种性
outwardly,
的
look at
祸
the
呢，就是也可
phenomenal
能
world
燃
and
烧的就
see
比较可
how
怕。就是这样
there's
一来的
the
话呢，
great
另外的
element
就
of
是
fire
因
that
缘
is
积聚以
pervasive
后
in
呢，
the
外在的
external
这
world
种
as
这个
well.
酷热啊，就是炎热，或者说是外
Because
在的
by
这种这
relying
个
on the
火
inner
山爆发
fire
也好，就是或者天气
could
干
lead
旱也
to
好，
the
还是
external
种种的这种现
appearance
象
of
呢，
fire
也
as
会
well.
这个
The
发生的。就是
fire
其
that
实我们就是
we
应
can
该
see
用
in
这
the
个佛法
phenomenal
的甘
world,
露水
let
来
it
熄灭自己
be
的这个
the
成烦祸啊，就是自己
volcanoes
注意
or the
一种非常
drought
清凉、非
and
常快乐、
heat
非常清爽的一
temperature.
种心态当
Those
中的话呢，
are
就
all
是应该
related to our
对周
inner
围的这个
aggression.
人呐，
So we
或者
need to
说是对
use
所
the
接染的
nectar
众生
of
呢，也是
Dharma
带来这
to
种快乐和这个
extinguish
光
the
明。
fire
这
of
个
aggression
是
so
非
that
常
we
重要
will
的。
abide in the
那么如
state
是
of
气候分少矣，
pure
就是分缓
and
矣，虚空啊，
calm
就是降
clarity
临
in
变
that
散
coolness,
前，
so that
二
this
参以下
coolness
界
would bring
灭
happiness and
亡
brightness to
分
sentient beings
成
who
会
make
成
connections
啊，
to
就是
us.
分成会
This
成
is quite
杂
important.
水
And
中
then the
就是它
next
这里
verse
呢，
talks
我们
about
刚才前面
after
已经
this
讲
such
了，就是
seven fires
其实这样
in
的
the
这种七
space,
次的祸，
the
就是
rain would
发
drop,
生以后
which
呢，
all
就是整
which
个
is all
就是外面
pervasive
的这
over
个
the
七世界的很
3,000-fold
多的
world.
这
The
种这
all the
个
world be,
就
underneath
是
the
包
second
括这个
dhyana
山
heaven
林呐
would
江
be
河，
all
全部都这个焚烧。
distinguished
那这个焚烧完了以后的
extinguished
话，那就是
and
其实这个呢，就是
becomes
应该是
dust
达成
and
一致啊，
water.
就是在其他
Previously,
当
we
中呢，
talked
就是
about how
会
after
降
the
的。我们
seven
这个气
fires,
候一
everything
岁
would
一
be
风的
burned
话
into
呢，实
ashes.
际上是属于一
According
种做
to
法，就是
the
还有按照这个
teachings
居士
of
论啊，这样的
Mahayana,
话呢，实际上是
it says that
气
the
候的
seven
话呢，
fires,
就是
one water
连续
and
就是
one
发生
wind.
这个七次啊，就是那么这个其实是7个火发生以后呢，就是有一个水，有7个火发生以后
Happens
有
in
一个
such a
水，
sequence.
然后
It
有
is
7个火发
that
生以后一个水，
seven
就是它
fires
这样一直呢
continuously
就是7
happening for
49
seven
后呢
times.
就是
So
先
after
就是
seven
出现
fires,
这个
there's one
49
great
次，
flood or
然
great
后呢就
water,
是
and
再
then
发生
there's
这个
another
这样
seven fires, and then
7
another
个火
water.
发
So
生以后
after
就是有
such
一
kind
个
of repetition
水
for 7
啊，就
times,
是这样
which
以
is
后呢，到
47
了这个
times of
7个
great
火
fire.
啊，就是7749的火，就是已经这个出现以后的话呢，就是这个水呢，就是有这个7次，
There's
然后呢
7
再
times
有这
of
个7个
water
火，
as
就是
well,
然
and
后
then
呢
there's the
再发
seven
生一
fire
个火，
and
就是
then
这个叫
one
做是
great
64
wind.
灾啊，就
That
是
is
64个
called
灾
the
难，就是
64
64灾，这个
calamities.
算起来的是应该是可以这
Altogether,
样的。
that's
其实中共
64
算的
times
话呢，
of
就是应该有
calamities.
8次的这个气
So
候啊，就
altogether,
是有
we can
8
say
次的
that
这
there
个
are
气
8
候，
times
还有
of
呢就
the
是
seven fires
有这个
and
7次的
7
水
times
啊，还有
of
1
the
次的风
water
啊，就
and
这个是
one
也
wind.
是如意宝藏论的另外一个男士当中呢，就是也有这
According
样
to
解
the
释的，就是我们这个居士
blue
论的注释当中呢，
connotation,
也应该
which
这
is
样
a
这样解
connotation
说，就是有些
on
前心和
the
有些引导文当中的话呢，
which
我
is a
们这个气
commentary
候
on
一
the
岁一
wish
风，
fulfilling
确实
treasury
是
as
这样
well.
这
It
样讲
talks
的。但
it
实际上的话呢，就是它的
explains
这
it
个
in such a way.
就是真正要算的话呢，就是这个
In
火度是
Abhidharma,
应该这个比如说
which is
这个应该
exactly the
是
same as
56个
Abhidharma.
火，然后再加上7个水，再加
So
上一个
altogether,
火，
there are
应该是
56
这样的。
fires, and on
那
top
这个
of that, there's
刚才那个
7 waters
7
and
个
one
火
wind
啊，就是
calamity.
焚烧完了以
Altogether,
后呢，就是
there
然后
are the
在那个就是天
64
空当中
types,
呢，就是降下这
64
个雨
times of
水啊，就是
calamity.
降下就是刚才讲的，就是应该是
After all
7
of
次的这个雨
those,
水。然后呢，就是
after
这个水呢，
everything has been burnt, then from space it rains down great water, and the water would be all pervasive over the 3,000-fold world below the second dhyana heavens. Since there's the raining of the water from the space, and on top of that, there were some residues of the dust and ashes that's left over from the burning of the phenomenal world, which then would be mixed into the water. It is almost like after a house being burned down and then there's a big rain afterwards, there would appear to have mud that is mixed with the water and the ashes that's left over. So after that, what happens is just like how salt would dissolve into water, everything would dissolve, which left only the fine particles of ashes which connected, which is very much mixed with the water.
四灿当中的第二灿就是一下呢，就是全部都已经毁灭了。现在我们七世界大家都知道，有情世界呢，就是全部都就是一个一的，就是依靠发现。
Since we know that all the world below the second dhyana heaven is destroyed, and the world, since it relies on the natural law, and all the sentient beings have already ascended upwards or took rebirth elsewhere. So the whole phenomenal world is in fact empty. It is unlike how we talk about the calamities that would happen in our world nowadays. It would be rather a bit different. There's a short video I would like to show you. Why is it that numerous countries have the records of Great Flood? Is it just a coincidence, or is it our collective memory? Many stories passed down from the cultures such as ancient China, ancient India, the Maya culture, as well as Indian culture, and so on and so forth. Let me just tell you a few. The first one I would tell you is the one from the Chinese mythology. It is a story of the goddess Nuwa who mended the sky, since there was a fracture that's created because of the god of water and god of fire got into a war, a massive battle, which then created a fracture in the space and then started to pour great water into the world, and Nuwa was the one who mended it. And then in the Maya culture, there was a text that's very much respected as a holy grail, and in that text it describes of how the human beings were created by God and then later forgot to worship their creator. Therefore, the God that created them started to flood the world. Another one is about also there are stories from ancient India. On top of that, there's the myth of Atlantis that sank into the bottom of the ocean. The timeline seems to be in sync with the previous cultures, the previous storyline as well. This water that's described over here, compared to the Great Flood that's described and talked about in the human history, they're probably not the same, but in some ways we can understand it in a similar way. We live in this world, and then later this world would be destructed by Great Flood or Great Water. From the ancient cultures of India, from Egypt, from Mayan culture, and from the various places and various records of history, various records of culture, there are different stories that's been passed down. And what we're studying is a perspective from Buddhism. This is one perspective. Whenever we look at history, whenever we look at some records or descriptions of the Great Flood. Of course, I'm not excluding that some of the pictures and some of the stories can be quite partial, or sometimes they could be made up. But however way it is, I think this human world indeed harbors many different situations. Now let's look at the next verse. It says that after that, the wind would blow into the 10 directions. Everything underneath the third dhyana heavens would be seized. All the partless particles would be one with the space. After the water washed over everything, then there could be some leftovers, some kind of particles, and after that, the great wind would blow everything into different directions. So all the celestial realms underneath the third dhyana, including the third dhyana, in fact, will be blown away by that great wind, which would be left with only the partless particles. Previously, we have already talked about the 7 fires, 1 water, and then this is the last one, which is 1 wind to blow everything. Previously, we talked about the 64 types of calamities. We can see that there are different ways of calculating those events. So the first dhyana heaven can be destroyed by fire, second dhyana heavens can be destroyed by water, and the third dhyana heaven can be destroyed by wind, but the fourth dhyana heaven will not get destructed. Throughout history, a great number of masters have already parted from the destructions of the 4 great elements. They will not be harmed by the element of wind or fire. That is very much depending on their practice and their meditative absorption. All the way between the first to the third dhyana, there's a pinnacle of that particular level of dhyana. That is to say, the first dhyana can be destroyed by fire, but the second dhyana will not be destroyed or touched by fire at all. There is a different level of meditative absorption, which is correlated to their ways of relating to the 4 great elements. So their meditative absorption is related to the 4 elements in such a way. This is a dependent arising. The wind, when it blows over, some said that the wind comes from around the 4th dhyana heaven and then start to destroy everything. And then some said that the wind wheel underneath will start to twirl so that it creates the wind. So there are different ways of describing it. Anyhow, this world, everything beneath the 4th level of dhyana heaven will be destroyed by the elements. Let's now look at the verses. Over here it says that the 3 dhyanas following such steps, since the grasping mind that is like fire, and blissful experience that's like water, and breath that's like wind, therefore such 3 faults of grasping onto the 3 different things corresponds to the 3 destructions. Yesterday I also mentioned something like this as well, but maybe a little bit different than the verses, therefore I need to make some corrections. The first dhyana, since they have the faults of grasping and holding on to conceptual mind, and such kind of faults or such kind of mind and objects of mind is just like fire. The conceptual mind, the dualistic mind that holds on to the coarse and the subtle recognition, this is what is referred over here in the first dhyana, since since the first dhyana beings have grasping towards such kind of conceptualization, therefore the first dhyana can be destroyed by the fire element. The second dhyana, since throughout their meditative absorption there is a sense of blissfulness, and that bliss is just like the streams of nectar, so it's very comfortable. Therefore, the second dhyana beings would grasp onto it, since that grasping is just like the water element, therefore water element would be able to destroy it. And the third dhyana is on the breath. The coming and going of the breath is just like wind. Therefore, the wind can destroy the third dhyana. The beings from the first dhyana to the third dhyanas do not have the coarse physical body like the beings in the desire realm. There is no coarse channel and wind or lung in it. Rather, the beings between the beings in the dhyana heavens would constantly abide in the clear and stable dhyana state. However, those beings would also rely on an element as well, and the fourth dhyana is based on the movement of the wind. So, when it comes to the practice, if you have a strong foot in meditative absorption, then it's not very easy for you to be destroyed by the four great elements. On contrary, if your meditative absorption is not strong enough, then all kinds of external conditions could become a destructive power to you. However, if your mind would be able to abide in the dhyana of peace and luminosity, by the power of this dhyana, you will be able to develop the state of realization of the fourth dhyana. Also, you will be able to develop all kinds of clairvoyance. This is just natural. So the inner meditative absorption would be reflected in the external phenomena, and these two can be very much corresponding to each other. To give you an example, Chandrakirti and lots of great masters, while meditating in the forest, if there were to be a fire in the forest, though everything else would be destroyed, but they would not be burned by those fire. For example, Milarepa, some hunter put him on this bed of fire. Everywhere else was burning, but Milarepa was not harmed by those fire at all. And some vicious people threw Milarepa into the water. He doesn't drown in the water. Therefore, through history, we can see that some of the accomplished ones have indeed already parted from the harms and destructions of the four great elements because of their inner realization has already peaked. Now we've covered the three dhyanas, the three dhyana heavens. Let's look at the fourth dhyana heaven. Why is the fourth dhyana so indestructible? According to Gateway to Knowledge, it says that the fourth dhyana has parted from the 8 types of faults. Therefore, the elements such as earth, water, fire, and space and wind does not destroy it. Does it mean the ones in fourth dhyana would not die? That is not the case either. It is only at the time of their own karma would come to the fruition. And in some explanation says that at the time when the power of their dhyana has exhausted, then the person would die as well. Therefore, the fourth dhyana doesn't mean that it is deathless. Some others may have the question that we have talked about the great element of fire, water, wind. There are two great elements that's left out, the space and the ground. Does the space and ground destroy the others then? The answer that is given over here is that the space has already parted from harming and to be harmed. It doesn't have any of those natures that can be harmed, therefore there is no need to talk about that. But in terms of earth or ground, when it comes to the fourth dhyana, it does not correlate to the fourth dhyana heaven. Since there is no correlation, for example, the first dhyana, since it has the object and subject of harm, therefore, since it has that kind of causes and condition already embedded in the first dhyana heaven, therefore, fire would be able to destroy it, and same applies to the second and third dhyana. On top of that, the earth or the ground element, since it is of rather very heavy and quite loaded, it is an element that is embedded in the desire realm. But when it comes to the form realm, the beings would have a very subtle luminous body and luminous and inanimate world as well. Therefore, this element doesn't have any correlation to those form realms. Over here in this verse, since the commentary doesn't really explain it, but we have already covered it, what it means is that the earth element does not apply to all of those celestial realms all the way between the first dhyana to the fourth dhyana heavens, since the earth element would be able to carry out its property in the desire realm, in the human world. For example, the ground or the earth and the rocks would be able to destroy human beings or destroy things by rolling over it. However, it is not a cause to create any destructions to the dhyana heavens. Before the destruction of the inanimate world, all the animate world, by relying on their own dhyana powers or their meditative absorption by the natural law, the power of natural law, they would take rebirth in elsewhere, especially would ascend to different dhyana heavens, to the first dhyana heaven, second or third or fourth dhyana heaven, or to the formless realm. So the inanimate world would be destructed at the time when no sentient beings is still living there. Now let's look at the third one, which is the duration of degeneration kalpa. Over here it says that the degeneration kalpa takes 20 medium kalpas. We talked about how the sentient or the animate world would start to distract first, and then the inanimate world would be destructed as well. That is just a natural law. I think in some ways it's a good thing, because the sentient beings or the animate world, all the sentient beings in the animate world would ascend to higher realms, which is definitely a good thing. If it is to descend to the lower realms, that would be quite sad. Just like how human beings in this world would abandon our physical body out of the reasons of practicing virtuous deeds, we would take rebirth in Trishrimsha's heaven. For the same reason, the beings of the dhyana heavens would follow the same pattern. In the fourth dhyana heavens, firstly, all the sentient beings would start to migrate to or to take rebirth in different realms, different heavens, and then the external inanimate world would come to destruction because of the different destructive powers. And that takes about 20 medium kalpas. Then the next outline is on the empty kalpa. So this particular chapter is rather short. It only talks about the two things. One is empty kalpa and the other one is degeneration kalpa. In the empty kalpa, after it has already become space, and it takes 20 medium kalpas, and then it becomes the beginning. After the degeneration kalpa, which takes 20 medium kalpas, and after 20 medium kalpas, the animated and inanimated world would be completely destroyed, which then becomes an empty kalpa again. The empty kalpa is, as how we stated earlier, the formation, duration, degradation, and empty kalpa all takes the duration of 20 medium kalpas. At that time, in the empty kalpa, everything stays in this neutral state, or this peace dharmakaya state, which is completely empty without anything. At that state, after a period of time, then within this space, some natural small particles would start to form, atoms or particles would start to form, which makes the beginning of the formation kalpa again. So that's the beginning again. According to many sutras, it is said that after our Saha world comes to an end, it takes 60 medium kalpas, and then the last one is called the nakshatra kalpa. At that time, there's the appearance of, or there's the birth of Buddhas over there. So out of the extensive and vast worlds, there are indeed many bright kalpas and dark kalpas. The bright kalpas means that there will be the birth of Buddhas over there, including the good kalpa that we live right now, the good kalpa that has 1,000 Buddhas, out of which the first 3 Buddhas has already been born and passed away, and then there's the Shakyamuni Buddha, who's the 4th Buddha, and then there's 996 Buddhas that's going to be born in this world. When we look at the kalpas, the formation, duration, degradation, and empty kalpas, each of them takes 20 medium kalpas, altogether 80 medium kalpas. This is all the 80 medium kalpas counted as one great kalpa. And then when you think of how the Buddha described of the 3 asankhya's of time, compared to this type of numbering system, our so-called time is, our measurement or units of time is rather quite minuscule compared to the months and years and so on. I think even when it comes to the counting of time, the historians, the astrologists use different ways of calculating time. But when it comes to the explanation of time, or the way that the Buddhists look at time, indeed, the perspective is quite unfathomable. Of course, I'm not convincing you to believe what the Buddhist is talking about, or you have to take this perspective. But I think it's quite crucial to expand expand your perspective so that you could see things both from the Buddhist point of view as well as from the modern science point of view. Now, I would like to show you a short video on the beginning of the world, the beginning or the formation of the world. You don't necessarily have to believe it, but this is just one perspective. About 4.5 billion years ago, when the universe began with the sound of a Big Bang as a tiny, dense fireball that exploded, and then different materials started to gather more, which formed to become the stars and the star clusters that we see nowadays. And that is the beginning of the galaxies in now terms. Out of all of those particles and different matters being together, there is one sphere that's about only 1,000 meters in its diameter, and that is the very beginning of Earth. Gravity and heat shaped the evolution of the planet, and then the Mars-sized object crashed into Earth, which was covered by magma at that time. The debris of this impact formed the moon. At that time, of course, the planet Earth and the moon was very unstable. But later, there were less and less asteroids crashing into the Earth. So there's the lower of the temperature. And because of the past strikes from the asteroids, the Earth formed different shapes of mountains and rivers, and then water started to form. But there were no life forms yet. It is only after the crustal movements which resulted in the volcanic eruptions, and then because of the melting of the snow mountains and of the ice ranges, slowly the life form began to evolve in this Earth. After 3.7 billion years of meticulous evolution, the human civilization took root on this planet.
OK 好不知道看不懂
Difficult to understand, huh?
这样啊 好像这个里面说48
Within the short video, it says something about 4.8 billions of years, 3.5 billions of years, and so on and so forth.
最后有个界位
Anyhow, we have already studied the formation, duration, degradation, and empty kalpa, and then at the end of it, this chapter, Longchenpa over here encourages his disciples to practice on the path of liberation with diligence. That is the textual outline. It says that this is the completion of the current world. He said that after the beginning kalpa and then the formation kalpa and then in the duration kalpa, this world is indeed extremely beautiful, quite complete, and really wonderful. But at the end, this world would come to an end of destruction after the 7 fires, 1 water, and 1 wind, or the 64 types of calamities, which would lead to the empty kalpa, would lead to emptiness. Such a beautiful and perfect world that we have, this world, this earth that we have, this 3,000-fold world, all the grand cities and the spectacular buildings, all of those things. Now when we look at it, they all look really beautiful. On top of that, the oceans and mountains and rivers, but all of those are impermanent. So all the practitioners, after making observation of this animated and inanimate world, you should realize that there is nothing to grasp onto. There is nothing to hold on to. For that reason, you should give up on everything, on grasping on anything, because that's the nature of the three existence. After making observation and knowing that we should not hold on to anything, according to Agama Sutra, it says that everything is impermanent and is subject to birth and death. There's nothing that would reside and abide permanently. So for that reason, we should not hold on to anything. We should abandon and give up the grasping towards anything that upholds the nature of the three existence. Rather, we should practice on the path of liberation, which is peace and bliss. We should practice on impermanence. According to the Sutra of Right Mindfulness, it talks about the wise ones should constantly think of death, since that is the only destination. To meditate and visualize and practice upon impermanence, especially practice upon death is impermanent, is the most supreme. But we should pay attention to it because it could create misunderstandings from the non-practitioners. Many of our practitioners have the calligraphy writing of death written and posted on their walls, and the non-practitioners, after looking at them, feel quite terrified, and they would start to guess that such practitioner may have the suicidal thoughts. But that is completely not true. This is a tradition passed down from Master Yin Guang. This is a practice on impermanence of human life. Whenever we talk about in the Parinirvana Sutra, it says that out of all the footprints, the most supreme is the footprint of an elephant, and out of all the practices, the most supreme practice is the practice up on the impermanence of human life. But I think it's probably better for you to hide that calligraphy of the word of death, because the other day some of the authorities, the local authorities, told me upon inspection of the different residents to the monastics, they noticed that quite a few of the monks have the letter death hung on their wall. And they felt that is it a sign of suicidal thoughts, or is it dangerous? Is this person okay? I told them that this is really a tradition to encourage practitioners to think about impermanence, and we all know that we have only one destination to go to, but out of various reasons we get distracted. We get so distracted and we don't want to practice. Indeed, this world, though it seems to be so perfect, so beautiful, so wonderful, so supreme, but at the end, everything would become a great ocean and would become empty, and it would become just a space. If the whole world would become like such, then how about our house, our home, and our family and friends, and our body, and anything in this world that you hold on to? Because everything is just like a water bubble, and there is no existent nature to them. So we should generate this mind of renunciation from this world. and seek only for liberation, which is the most reliable. For that reason, we need to seek for the most supreme, most peace, and most blissful path that is liberation and Bodhi. This is quite important. Now we have completed the 6th chapter on the degradation kalpa and empty kalpa. Let's end our class here today.
明天开始呢，讲那个七情苦乐的这第7品开始，